when did you notice that Keffe D had started going public doing interviews about the Tupac case?
He just slowly kind of got self-confident or something, thinking that he could get out in public and talk about it, even though he's a perpetrator. He's a criminal, and I guess he thought time went by and there was no statute of limitations. And so he just slowly started. But I think it was once he moved to Vegas, then he was there at the scene of the crime. And I think nothing happened to him, nobody arrested him. I think he got real confident, a little too big for his britches.
Were you like, what is he doing? How did you react to him, the fact that he was going public, and what did you think did you think something was going to happen as a result of it?
Dwayne, I just thought he's crazy. He doesn't know what he's doing because they're just taking notes and he's all on tape and they're going to use it against him. And you can't keep people from themselves. And that was my sense, was it was just a matter of time. But my doubt was that the police department didn't want to solve it before then. And then I made some phone calls and I found out they had him under surveillance. Here he is, what does he think? He moves from Compton to, he's a homie, he's a Crips leader, and he moves from Compton to Henderson, on the suburbs in a nice neighborhood, and tries to meld in, and his background is pretty horrible. So I think they probably would have watched him, because he was a Crips, big guy in the Crips. I forget how high he was, but he was pretty big. It was stupid. It was just, but Crips are stupid most of the time. That's why they get caught. So, and so that, he didn't have the common sense to say to himself, dude, maybe this won't work out. You keep a low profile, it doesn't matter how much time, time goes by because there's no statute of limitations on murder. They can get you any time. But they built a case against him, I'm sure, during that time while they had him under surveillance. So when they got him, they had the arrest warrant and then indicted him and charged him and whatnot. So it all went very smoothly for the police department. And I was glad, because I tried to encourage them, and part of the reason I wrote the book was because they were not solving the case intentionally. Because all the evidence is still where it was then and now. And so good on them for doing it. I got emotional, and it's something, you're a cop and you get into the business to solve crimes and put people away and to bring justice to Tupac. The saddest thing for me is that of Cathy Shakur, his mother, that she wasn't alive to see it.
Yeah, I agreed. At least, she filed that wrongful death lawsuit against Orlando back in the day. So at least It's clear we have evidence that she knew who was responsible.
Yeah, she knew it was him.
But it would have obviously been nice for her to have seen.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the current status of the case? The trial keeps getting delayed. Keffe keeps getting new lawyers and getting more trial delays. The current date is set for August of 2026.
Well, the trial was supposed to be March. It was supposed to be last year too, I think. My sense is he's going to take a plea deal. I think that usually when it doesn't go to, and they try to hesitate, he's causing the pauses. Cops are taught, my sense, but if he keeps firing his attorneys, they're not giving him what he wants. And plus, it takes a lot of money I don't know, what would it be, $500,000 to represent himself, and who's going to do it pro per? The guy's guilty as sin. So I think we're going to see a plea deal. I could be wrong, but it looks to me that all signs are pointing to everybody's kind of at the end of the boxing match where they're on the ropes. And somebody's going to go down, and I think it's going to be a plea deal. It'll save the county, it'll save the city of Las Vegas a whole lot of time. He was actually That's at the county line, so it's whether it's the city or the, it's the county. Of course, the police department covers all of Las Vegas. There's no city police.
The whole metro
county.
area, yeah.
Yeah, sheriff's department, and they're one and the same. They merged years ago. Yeah, it's a metropolitan area. So I think they're going to save everybody a lot of time and money, and I think he's going to plead out, and I think he'll get a lesser. But he just got, for having a fight, wasn't it having a fight? He just got...
Yeah, he's in state prison for about a year from that jailhouse
yeah,
brawl.
14 to 16 months.
Yeah.
14, so he's a little over a year. So he's got to, and it's not going to be concurrent with what he gets here. So he's not a young guy anymore. And how old is he?
He's 61, 62. He's early 60s.
Yeah, so he's early 60s right now. He's probably not getting the best food in prison. So, I mean, it is a Nevada state prison. And so I would say he's never going to see the light of day if he takes a plea deal. He's going to be in prison the rest of his life.
Okay, I know you can't ever reveal the source of this, but you are the person that released...
Well, I could.
I know you won't.
No, I won't.
So I know you won't reveal the source, but you were the person that first released the photo, the famous / infamous autopsy photo of Tupac. Whatever you can tell us about how that came about, how you came into possession of that.
When Tupac died, the coroner's office was around the corner. And because of all the people at the hospital, I mean, there were cars circling and playing music, and they're standing up on their cars, and that parking lot was just loaded with cars. And then when word spread that he died, people were going to the scene, and they also were going to the hospital. So it was real close, so they just took him. So my understanding is they took him out a back doorish way, and not where everybody was standing in the entrance. And it's the back of the hospital is where the trauma unit is. So you're at the back of the hospital anyway. So they took him out got him, in a van, and took him around the corner to the coroner's office. They did it right then. So there were, my understanding, 5 cops in there, coroner's office employees in there. I got a copy of the coroner's report too. They called and asked me, "We made a mistake, could you give it back?" And I said, "No." So you've got people who have access, taking cameras. There were like 4 cameras in the room. So you have different kinds of film. So you've got people taking cameras, and so not just one camera took photos of him dead. It was a pretty graphic photo and clear, nothing blurry about it. But I don't tell anybody what kind of film it was. I don't I don't discuss that, but anybody can figure out who. But there were people coming and going inside there too. My sense is one of those photos slipped out, and shame on them. I mean, I'm a reporter, somebody hands me something, and then what do you do with it? So there was the discussion with the editor and the publisher as to, do we do this or not? So all those rumors were going around that Tupac faked his own death. So to stymie that as a journalist, as an author, I have the proof from that. And so that was the thinking. It was a big decision whether we did that or not. We almost didn't do it, and then we did.
And what feedback have you gotten over the years about it, the good and the bad?
Oh, I've gotten, people tell me I stole it, really, and how could I have done that? You think I could just walk into the coroner's office and go to a desk, or walk into the coroner's, autopsy room?
Especially with a famous murder like that, it's much more.
Yeah, exactly.
More
so
yeah.
So I was shocked when I got it, and the person said, "Here it is." Here, and I don't know what the motive was behind the person. I didn't ask any questions, and a dog didn't give it to me. A human being gave it to me. I don't give the gender, and lots of people have guessed, and I've been asked, and people say, now I know it was this, and I just don't respond. I don't give it away.
Right.
If the person who gave it to me dies, I've thought about that. Would I come out with it then? And I thought, nah, I don't know why, although the person, and that would be to save that person. It's so funny because, 10 years later, I like to work we're here at a cafe. I like to write at a cafe. I get a lot of work done, and I get food, and I get, coffee, drinks. The cops go to them too. So I'd run into cops at coffee houses and say, I know it was so-and-so. And you tell me, I know it was so-and-so. And I'm just deadpan, and I don't react. And you get good at it when you're asked so many times. There are still people, I know it was that person for a fact. I just say, well,
there's going to be people in the comments of this video saying they know who it is.
And I say, have fun with it. Yeah. No, I've never revealed it. The person who gave it to me has never revealed it. So you've got two people who are locked up tight, our mouths, and we're not going to give it. I didn't say don't tell anybody. That's just kind of how it happened. And I think I'm more than anything, in the beginning, it was to protect the person, and from theft, I would imagine.
Wasn't there an investigation internally? Because that caused problems at the department.
There was an investigation. So what was his name? He was such a good reporter too. What was his name? He was in the newsroom, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool newsman, and he was the only one in the newsroom who didn't have a degree, and he was a good reporter, straight from the bottom up. He was a cub reporter first, and he got a call from Metro. They had launched an investigation into who slipped me the photo, and they even accused me of stealing it, and I wouldn't defend myself on that either. I'm not gonna, but so he comes running over to me at the desk and says, at my desk, and newsrooms are open wide, everybody can see everything, and he said, they're doing an investigation. I'm like, oh my, well, have fun, good luck, and I'm not going to help you with. So he put me on the phone, and I just said, good luck, I wish you all the luck, let me know how it goes. And it ended in 30 days, and the head of the, what is it called, IAB, the internal
affairs.
Yeah, they're trying to fire somebody, and I can go deadpan, and I did not help them with their, and he said, so it was the chief, I think it was the chief who was talking to him, the reporter, and I talked to him. So the chief lied, and the chief told the reporter that, my fellow reporter at the Las Vegas Sun, that I was cooperating. So I said, let me talk to him. So I talked to him. I said, why are you saying that? Because you know very well I am not participating. This is the first I've heard that you have an investigation. But have fun, good luck. Here he is. And I gave the phone back to the reporter. So, I just didn't play along with they're trying to lie into getting me to, I guess he was the first reporter, he was, been there for years at the Las Vegas Sun, and he didn't know because I didn't tell anybody.
Right.
I didn't tell any of my coworkers. I've told no family, no one knows where I got it.
Yeah.
Except for myself and the other person.
Wow.
And if the other person wants to say, they're welcome to do it. But.
Right. With your history with this case, what did you think about, the fact that here that this guy's actually, are they going to close this? Like, what were you?
Oh, I've always been disappointed in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and because it was an easy case in my mind to solve. It was a twofer. You did this to me, and now I'm going to do this to you. It all happened. There's no all the stories out there about it and conspiracy theory. It's a really simple case to solve. And so I would, one of the first things I noticed with the hesitancy on the police department was all these, I was on it like flypaper. A homicide cop called me, and I was asleep, and called me and said, hey, get down to the Las Vegas Strip. There's a big rapper, Tupac Shakur. They couldn't even say his name, Tupac Shakur. They couldn't pronounce it. Got shot, and so I went down, and I've been covering the case ever since. And all these out-of-town reporters, magazines, a lot of the rap, hip-hop magazines, all the writers were calling me and saying, hey, we can't get a hold of the sheriff, we can't get a hold of anybody, a detective. And I called one of them, they said, we're not talking to the outside media. And they had I remember it was Monday, it happened on a Saturday, right? So it was Monday, they held a news conference. And in Las Vegas, you don't get more than 5 reporters at a news conference. There were 20 reporters. And the detective kind of stood up on a grassy knoll, I'll call it, kind of outside the homicide unit at the time, which was just down the, was in a neighborhood. And he looked like a deer caught in headlights. But they didn't give any, the press release was real short, you probably have a copy of it. No info, and no suspects, and the car came up, drove away, and that was about it. And then he wouldn't answer his phone, and Kevin Powell, he's written a lot about Tupac, and he did Keeping It Real, the book. Great guy. He came to town, called me. I'd never met him before. He called my phone in the newsroom and said, hey, I'm downtown and the police won't talk to me. I said, well, you're in the wrong place, because they're downtown now, but they weren't then. And so I drove him. I went down, had a coffee with him, and took him to homicide. And I walked in and I asked for the sergeant, Kevin Manning, and he was in charge of the homicide unit. And so it was a 3-man team, 2 detectives, 1 sergeant. And he came to the desk, and I introduced him to Kevin Powell, and I said, Kevin, can you get a ride home? And he said, yes, and to your hotel. And so I got back to my newsroom. It was, it had just happened, a few days. I was tired. I was staying up all night practically. And I went to work the next day, and on my voice message, don't you ever do that to me again. I'm not talking to the media. He was so ticked off.
That was Manning?
Manning was so
wow.
So ticked off at me. And
why didn't they want to talk to the media? What was the relationship just in general between Las Vegas police and the media?
Well, we were fine before that. They didn't want to talk about the Tupac case. So then I was a little frustrating, and so I was trying to get to the bottom of it and find out. And you cover the police beat. I was a police beat reporter, crime beat. So I talked to a captain. I can't remember if I called him or if I think I ran into him down at City Hall or something, or at the metro station. And I just said, what's going on? They're not talking to anybody. And he said, we're not talking to anybody. They don't want us to solve the crime. And I said, why not? He said, it's bad. Big trial like that, all these rappers and gang members and gangbangers coming into town, it's bad for tourism. And so,
who was that coming down from? Like, how high up was that?
Well, also, it was coming down from the state. It wasn't, someone had said city, it wasn't the city. It was the police department. But the police department, of course, they were getting their orders from elsewhere. That came from the governor's office.
So the governor was even saying, this is bad for tourism.
Kill it. And they thought, in their infinite wisdom, that if they didn't talk to the media, that the story would die. It actually, what are they hiding? And so it actually fueled it. And more reporters were coming to town and stuff. It actually fueled it. They would have been better off just being straight up. And the story, that's when it goes away. But they didn't. So just, me, I never stopped writing about it. They're very upset with me when my book came out. You see so many players in it, Frank Alexander, the bodyguards. Frank was a good guy. We became friends, and I'd go to LA and we'd meet up. And but they're not real bodyguards. I mean, he worked at an AT&T store. They're not trained, and you just have big guys following him around. It looks like an entourage, but they don't know how to protect them. And he was in the car behind Tupac. And I interviewed Frank, of course, and what he said was, he couldn't see anything. So what Frank said was, Frank Alexander said all he could see was smoke from the gun. He couldn't see anybody. And then the white Cadillac, people saw the white Cadillac, and then it just sped off. All Frank said he did see was a brown arm, and Frank was black. He saw a brown arm come out of the car and shoot, and then after that it was nothing but smoke. Suge Knight, because he was driving, they couldn't get him to, and he had a house, and he played on the football team at UNLV. I taught journalism there, and he lived on the southeast end of Vegas, just down around the corner from Mike Tyson, and they were homeless. And he wanted to come in, and they finally get him to go into, back then it was a little police station, now it's big. And I talked to the sergeant afterward about how it went with Suge Knight in the meeting room at homicide unit, and they said he didn't tell us a thing, didn't see anything, don't know anything. Right. And my thing was, the reason they were doing it was they were going to take care of it themselves, but they didn't. They did. There was a bloodbath after.
Back in Compton,
where the Bloods and the Crips, because Suge, of course, was the Bloods, and it was the Crips who shot him. So they just rat-a-tat-tat. All kinds of people got killed.
How did you first hear who was responsible?
I was working the phones like crazy, talking to anybody I could, and I don't recall exactly when I knew, but I don't think it took that long. After 6 months, I started thinking about writing a book, because people were saying, you're there, you're on the ground, you were at the scene, you should be the one, somebody's got to cover this, because the police aren't giving the information out, somebody's got to get word out. And entertainment writers told me, you need to write a book, and I told them, you write the book. And so I kind of was became an author, and then I, about 2 months later, a local publisher in Las Vegas took it, and it became a Los Angeles Times bestseller.
Yep. And it was kind of the first book about the murder.
It was the first book.
You got out front.
I got out front, and that's why I was on a real fast track. We have done 2 editions, so there are 3 editions out. I'd love to do a 4th edition, update it,
right.
Say who officially did it, Keffe D, and then I don't have to write about Tupac again. Tupac's buddy, who whispered in his ear, "Hey, that's Lando. He's the one who took my medallion, death row medallion, at the Foot Locker, a month ago or something." And they just went and stomped the heck out of him. I was called by a source at the MGM right away on that one, that had gone down. And
interesting. When did you get that call?
It happened in the evening, and I got it, I think, the next day. Afterward, the next day, said, "Hey, and if he hadn't done that, if he hadn't beat him up, because all it was a twofer. You do this to me, I do this, 2 for 1. You did this to me, I'm going to go get you."
I think Keffe has brought it up again recently. He's tried to argue that they had to that Orlando Anderson had to go to the hospital.
No,
after
he didn't.
That fight.
You can see the video. He's yeah, and I mean,
he's fine.
Everybody.
He's fine.
I called security. They told me exactly what he did. The MGM. He was fine. He was a bit bruised. They had him on the ground, but no bones were broken. And he's talking to the security guard, and then a police officer comes up, talks to him. "You want to file a report?" "No, I don't want to file a report." And he walked away. He walked away. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He wasn't on a gurney. He walked away. There was no damage. So he can make it all up and try to reinvent what happened, but that it was real simple.
Yeah, and my argument to that too has always been that if that existed, there would be a hospital record. And back when he got sued by Tupac's mother, Orlando would have produced that and was being pursued by the detectives. He could have just produced that as his alibi. Here's my hospital record. I was at 10 miles away at the hospital when the shooting happened. I'm not your guy, but he of course didn't do that because that doesn't exist.
Well, the hospital for Tupac, because the bad thing they did with Tupac so Suge arrived early, or Suge was there already, and some guys were with him, of course, and a bike cop came up pretty quickly. Michael McDonald was on duty that night, and I interviewed Mike. I know him, and because you're on the beat as a police reporter, you end up knowing everybody, but the bad thing they did was they had a hard time opening the car door, and they should never have done it because he had chest injuries, he had lung injuries. And my thing is, they're just pulling him out of a skinny space, and here he is, he's all torn up, and laid him on the ground, and that to me was, who knows if that caused any damage. You never moved them. And I always thought, God, that probably did him in, because they probably tore him even more. It was sad because you just don't do that. You wait for the ambulance to. And when you look at a case, all the things that could have gone wrong in this case did. And that's why it's taken so long to come to justice too, from the very start, and the way Suge handled it. And then he went and talked to the cops. And
yeah, I've read the transcript of his interview with them, and it's just, I don't know anything. Nothing happened. There was no fight earlier that night. I don't know. He wouldn't name any of the people he was with that night. Of course, he didn't want to name any of the Pyrus he was with that night. He doesn't name Neckbone or Bunch or any of those guys. He's just nothing, no fight that night, nothing. And yeah, he was just a brick wall. They didn't get anything.
Yeah, they had the fight.
And you believe he knew exactly who did it, I would assume.
Well, and they went and shot up the next day. They shot up Compton.
Right.
So, but they didn't get Orlando. And then Orlando went on TV. Remember when Orlando went on TV? Which was, dude, what are you doing?
Right.
He's trying, I'm innocent, and people are, but you can't fix that.
The crazy thing is too, like there's Keffe said he was telling Orlando, shut up, man, stop talking about it. But then what does Keffe do, 25 years later?
Yeah, Keffe ran his mouth. Yeah, Keffe turns around and runs his mouth too, and Orlando, and who knows if Orlando too would have gotten away with it for so many years, unless the Bloods would have taken him out, and that kind of surprises me with Suge, that they didn't. They just had that. It was 2 days of a bloodbath. I think it was pretty bad in Compton. But then Suge, if he's going to take care of it, why didn't he take Orlando out? Suge spent a lot of time in Compton. And so that if they talked big, but nobody did anything, they didn't do it, would have saved everybody a lot. I'm not for killing people, but if you're going to, if you say you're going to do something, why didn't you?
Right. Tell me about your book. How did that come? How did you decide to write your book, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I've never written a book. That was my first book. It was because all these entertainment writers and stuff, everybody was following my coverage, and we're an afternoon paper. At the time, the Las Vegas Sun was competing with the Review Journal, which is morning paper, and I was beating them. I had cops inside talking to me, and then I was on the street. I was going everywhere. I was talking to everybody, and the frustration was clearly they didn't want to solve the case. So I love a challenge, and my thing was, okay, they don't want to solve it. I'm going to write a book about it and tell everybody about it and I was at the hospital when I was at the crime scene, and then I was at the hospital when Tupac died. And so I interviewed his mother, I interviewed I interviewed Valletta Wallace as well after Biggie Smalls was killed, and I I mean, I interviewed so many. I was on a TV show with Cathy Scott. She wasn't about solving her son's murder. She was about keeping his legacy alive, his essence, his music, his poetry. Whereas Valletta Wallace, when Biggie Smalls died, she was all about solving it. But Fanny was more, there wasn't anything she could do to bring him back. So her thing was to keep him on. She was there that Saturday, by the way. She was there.
What was your interaction with her like? Like the first time you met her and all, do you remember?
Well, I called her, she worked for a law firm at the time, so I called her law office and I talked to an attorney there, and then I asked if I could speak with her, and she was unavailable. And then I tried again, and then she spoke with me. And then I was on that BET show with her. And I sat right next to her, and somebody said, "Didn't she get angry with you?" And I said, "No, she was just all about keeping his voice out there and keeping him alive through his work. And she wasn't about, she didn't get into weeds over stuff like that. You look at where she came up from, and then where Tupac came up from, it's pretty amazing, you know, and she's very sweet. She was very, very polite, very nice to me. And Valletta was too. Valletta invited me to her Teaneck, New Jersey home. I was in New York. That Biggie Smalls left for her.
Right.
And she invited me over, and I interviewed Valletta Wallace. May they both rest in peace. They're both gone.
What was the scene at the hospital like while Tupac was still alive?
I was there the last, we checked in. There was another reporter who would go and check in. We would check in every day. I would go in, and I of course would call the main doctor a lot. I got the doctor directly, so I could tell his, you know, he had all those younger singers who were in his posse, you know, who were with him, and and Fanny was there. His mother was there. His aunt came in from Carolina. She was there. And I think his mom came in from Atlanta. And you could just tell a change that he wasn't, because I would call every day to get the status on him. He was still in a coma. And they had to open him up 2 times. It was the third or the fourth, it's in my book. Because they would sew his lung back up. They removed one lung, he had one left. It kept ripping open. And so when they were gonna open him up again and do it, Fanny said, no. The word spread that he was going to die. And you could just tell the atmosphere. I remember one of his backup singers, was crying, and it was just sad to watch. And the whole scene was, and this was at the trauma unit, so there's just one small door, and I was leaning. There's a picture of me with Suge Knight coming past me, and Suge came in to see him, and he had his homies behind him. And Suge Knight came in and walked in. They wouldn't let him past the security, because at a trauma unit, there's always a security officer. And that's nothing new. That's what was set up. And I knew something was going on. Nobody talked very much, and I just waited for the doctor to come out. The doctor came out. I was the only print media there, and one TV station, and we were an afternoon paper, and they held the paper for me. And I interviewed him, got all the details, time of death and the cause and what happened. And then I took my reporter's notebook and I wrote the story, and I took my radio to the city desk and I called it in, and we broke news, including The Guardian in England picked up and we were the first, picked up my story. The Las Vegas Review-Journal didn't yet have an internet, and we had just gone on a few months earlier online, and so we punched it out there. And we were the first to break the story, and I'm quite proud of doing that. I mean, I don't like the moment because of what it was, but word spread pretty quickly. And that's how my name got out there, was because I was covering it quite a bit. And that's kind of how, and everybody was contacting me.
Do you remember some of the early stories with the case that you broke when you were in the early covering it? As things developed?
I broke when the biggest one initially after was one of Tupac's homeboys lived in New York, and he got in a fight and was killed. And so people were trying to say, oh, it was, it was part of it, had nothing to do with it. I think he was at a low-income housing project, one of the projects.
That was Fula, yeah.
Yeah, Yafa Fula got killed. And so everybody was trying to tie, or see if it was tied, was it because he was there with Tupac? It wasn't, had nothing to do with it, it was just a beef. He was young. I mean, I saw him out there. Those guys were all hanging out by at the hospital. So the outlaws were at the hospital, but it was Danny Boy, who I was standing kind of by the curb. I parked and I came up and I was talking to a couple of people. I think there's only one or two reporters there. We all were kind of coming in and out, and but there was clearly that if we were in the room, you'd say the room changed, the atmosphere changed. And there's Danny Boy I was probably there about 30 minutes, and I just waited it out. And he just broke down, dropped to his knees, and just broke down and cried. And it's sad for me right now talking about it.
What do you think about these alternate conspiracy theories about Tupac's murder? There's obviously the Tupac is alive stuff's always going to be out there. There's going to be people who think he faked it and he's in Cuba. But also there's people out there that try to blame other people for the murder, and there's pretty convoluted theories out there about various.
Yeah, I don't participate in any of the theories out there. I don't join into little online chats and stuff. I don't opine on that. If I'm asked, I'll answer, but I don't try to feed it or make it, because you're always going to have. I mean, there were more conspiracy theories around Biggie Smalls, I think, than there Tupac there were, but Biggie Smalls, boy, that really went free for all.
Right.
But no, I don't participate in those discussions, and I think that's just, I hear them, and of course I did participate in some. I didn't ask for it, but when I got it, the reason we put it in the book was he is dead.
Right.
So in that way I did participate. Other than that, I don't start things, I don't try to stir things up. I talk about it when people want to talk about it.
Yeah, I try to stay out of it too. I'm not in this. I don't like internet beefs. I think they're childish.
It's it's a waste of time.
Childish. You're not going to convince. Look, there's a saying: you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was.
So it's not based on fact.
Yeah, and I recently caught up with somebody that had followed the case really closely for years, and has always known, as we do, who was behind Tupac's murder.
Yeah.
And he said when Keffe went public and went on BET, he's like, for me, that was like at that point from then on, if you still didn't believe that that's what happened, then there's nothing that you could ever tell that person that will ever convince them, because how does that not close the case? It's a real simple case,
and shame on the police for not. It's a real simple case. They could have had that thing go to justice right away.
Yeah.
They had all the players, just round them up and go do it. And they didn't do it. And that's what, the police can't even solve it. Well, they could have solved it. They chose not to. And that to me is a derelict of duty.
My thing is just always, I just want the truth.
Yeah.
Just don't bullshit me.
Yeah.
The truth as you know it is what I want to know.
Just tell it like it is.
Because, in my business, what is even the nature of the truth? I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Well, it's the same with books, because I interviewed 200 people for the Ann Rule book. You've got to read it. You're not going to believe what she did. You're not going to believe.
I've heard little bits and pieces about kind of some of the crazy stuff she did, but I'm really interested in hearing
this
full.
This is beyond the pale.
And we're talking about Ted Bundy. You're writing a book on Ted Bundy,
yeah.
And his friend Ann Rule, who ended up writing an expose on him.
Yeah. Yes. And so put me on when the book
I
comes
will,
out.
absolutely. I would love to come. We could have a great Bundy conversation because I did that Ted Bundy series last year. I want to get into some of my journalism 101 questions.
Okay.
So how long have you been a journalist for?
Well, I was a member of the working press for 23 years as a police reporter, and I was a stringer for the New York Times for 11 years, and I was a stringer for Reuters for about 10 years. So I covered a lot of different stories, mostly crime, and then Tupac became my first book, but I was still free. I write for Psychology Today. I've been there 12, 13 years, and just write periodically. And Forbes, I was writing about once a week for Forbes, covering crime and that sort of thing.
How, as a journalist, how do you, especially as like a crime beat reporter, how do you develop sources?
Well, it's just like a City Hall reporter. You go to City Hall. I was a City Hall reporter for a very short time. You go to City Hall, you sit through the meetings. I would stop in at Homicide. There are a lot of murders in Vegas. There's a lot of crime in Vegas, but I would, every morning, I had to be in the news. I was a morning. They had an afternoon police beat, and then I was a morning coverage, and I had to be there at 6. And so first thing I do is call the records department at Metro before any of the bosses are in, and it was all women, and they would answer the phone, and they all knew me, and I'd say, okay, what happened last night? What crime, what happened last night? So I a lot of times get crimes first, and they give me the details. Then I'd walk into Homicide, I'd walk into the Detective Bureau downtown, and City Hall too, because things would overlap, and get police records. I did the old-fashioned way. I go to courthouse and get court records. But once you form a rapport with, I go to a lot of crime scenes, a lot of car accidents, because that was my beat too. So I'd go, and you're just standing around. Homicide, when someone is murdered, because I've been to more homicide scenes that I care to count, the body's not going anywhere, and so they take their time, and you get to know the detectives, you get to know the beat cops, you get to know, and pretty soon they start calling you and tipping you off on stuff. Also, my beat was the prison, which is, just 60 miles north of Vegas. So I would check in with the prison and find out what's going on then. So I would follow a case from the arrest to their stint and find out what's going on there too. So I kind of follow it full. So you get a whole lot of sources. So I was a clerk at Pacific Bell, and it was a good job. I was a single parent, and I always liked to write. I took creative writing classes at a junior college, but a newspaper came to town in Mission Beach, where I lived, and I had been writing a little silly column for this throwaway monthly that I didn't really call journalism, but you have to start somewhere. And this newspaper came to town, so I went to San Diego State University, and I bought the first edition of news writing and reporting, and gleaned through that because I did not know how to write an article. And so the Beach and Bay Press, we used to call it the Bitch and Bay Press. The Beach and Bay Press heard that I had written some columns for this little calendar and hired me. And my first crime story was on Mission Boulevard in Mission Beach. It was a DEA bust, and I went to it. I'm standing in the middle median because the street's cut off, and there are all these black jackets with FBI yellow letters and DEA on the back, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. And that's when I got hooked on crime. And Camp Pendleton was nearby, and that when you're a police reporter, you also covered the military. So I went to Somalia, I went to Saudi, Panama, with the Marines, covering them, and the paper shut down after 50 years. It folded, the Vista Press, and I was already stringing for the Associated Press and the San Diego Bureau. Sally Busby, who ended up running the entire AP Association in Washington, D.C. I was so proud to work for her. And she taught me a lot. And I worked for AP as a stringer for about a year and a half. And I always say I faked my way into the news business. And then I started looking for full-time jobs. And there was an opening at the Las Vegas Sun for a police beat, morning shift and afternoon shift. And I got hired by them, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah, so when you write breaking stories, I can remember the New York Times calling me and asking me if I would cover a story for them, and I asked my editor, can I do 2 stories, one for them, and that's how that. So I ended up, and I was on the cover once of New York Times Magazine. So, you know, I was with the paper of record. I was very happy to be with them. And so one thing leads to another, and that's how. But I didn't have a journalism degree. I was 38 years old when I broke in, and I just say I faked my way into the news business, and it changed the trajectory of my life.
So with police sources, what's in it for a police source to tip you off about something? A detective calls you, what's in it for them? Why do they?
Well, probably pissed off at somebody, but I'm sure there's motivation. Sometimes if they tip you off in something, you end up interviewing them and their name is in the paper. And some of them, what was it one guy told me one time, he said, don't believe any of these detectives. They go through those papers, they pull it out immediately, they want to see their name in print. But but I don't look at the motives of anybody, I'm just covering the story. So I don't really care what their motives were, but sometimes they're ticked off, you know, they're pissed off inside and they don't like the way it's being handled, so they'll let a reporter know, and you get everything that's going on, and you end up, they're your source, and you go to other sources and you write the story. So they get to see a story that's being held back or something, they get to see that go in print. And, you know, I made that happen, kind of thing.
Yeah, I have some local reporter contacts in Vegas now, and what's interesting is when this all started to unfold a couple of years ago, Detective Mogg, who was the detective that finally...
He wasn't there when I was, probably a beat cop when I was there.
He may have been, but he's retired now. So that's how much time has gone by.
It's been a long time. I was there in the 90s.
But I heard from reporters there that Mogg he did not like talking to the press. He was not a press friendly. He was not animosity, but just had no use for it. And he was I got the sense talking to Mogg that he's very by the book and serious about his business, and that's what he does. You know, he does his job.
Yeah, and then sometimes they try to shut down reporters. My thing is, I love a challenge. You want to shut me down, I'm going someplace else. So I'll go, I'm going to get the story. Because sometimes they think if they don't tell you, you can't get it, which I think is what they thought about Tupac. Well, if we don't tell them anything, they're not going to get anything. I just go up, under, around, and you get people. You know, I call those girls every morning at the desk. You know, they're taking calls and stuff, and I got stories from them a lot. You know, and cops would say to me, "How'd you get that story?" And I just smile because you don't give up your sources.